let's start with a game. Grab two friends, or if you don't have any around, call it a thought experiment. Your goal is to recreate a drawing of a cat, one square at a time, on a grid. But you're not allowed to see the original cat drawing. Your two friends will act as advisors, trading off, telling you what to draw in a random square on the grid. A7 is this curve, D2 is this line in the corner, etc. The twist is that only one of your friends, the trustworthy advisor, can actually see the original cat drawing. Your other friend, playing as the deceiver, doesn't have anything to go on and is actually just making shit up. Your real goal is not just to draw the cat, but to figure out which one of your friends has access to the truth. Who is the trustworthy advisor, and who is trying to deceive you? The question at the heart of this game is, if you want to convince someone of something, what is the actual value of having the truth? Which advisor will win? The one just going on vibes, or the one with the actual cat drawing? The actions we can take to change the world are like different tools in a toolkit. Many tools work best when used by a group, like protesting. Some actions are like multi-tools. For example, voting is good, but what is even more effective for change is telling your friends you voted, how you thought about the issues, any research you did, your experience mailing in the ballot. Now there are a lot of tools for change that are dubiously ethical or just straight up unethical, such as creating bots to AstroTurf, bribing justices, spreading misinformation, intentionally bypassing the checks and balances of your government office. These unethical tools seem to be used more and more frequently these days, and they are extremely effective. Their success begins to raise the question, at what point do the ends begin to justify the means? If you have strong convictions about how the world should be, can you let those convictions slide to help you get there? Popularist politicians, who have gained traction all over the world, have no true convictions, so they aren't constrained to act within their convictions. There are still a lot of ethical actions for change anyone can do. Protesting, organizing, litigating, and financially supporting all of these actions is super important. But a question I've been struggling a lot with lately is, will a good person always have a smaller subset of the tools of an unethical person? Will someone striving to act ethically always be one step behind? Just being good and right hasn't been enough. But why? The bad news is we've failed. We failed to truly understand the mindset of people we disagree with, so we've failed to predict their feelings and choices. In turn, we've failed the most vulnerable people in our society. To understand the people we disagree with, we need to better understand the two major forces of oppression in our society. How these forces of oppression interact has left us in our current state of the nation. The good news is that I actually believe that there are tools that can only be effectively leveraged by good people with convictions. These tools are difficult to wield, but very powerful in their own way. But before we can use them for change, we have to confront our failures to truly fundamentally understand the people we disagree with. In a divided society, it's easy to see our differences. But to meaningfully change the world, we need to better understand what we all have in common. Our large, fancy, squishy brains. How do other people actually perceive their lives? What is the value of the truth? To talk about people's unique life experiences in a nuanced way, I've made this happiness fulfillment visualization. This is just my personal framework I've slowly evolved to make sense of everything. It's not perfect, but humans are complicated. We're all in one of these three life states. Let's start with the treadmill, as this is probably where most of us are right now. Now, there's something strange about how happy we feel compared to other people. We don't seem to feel happier than people who have had it somewhat worse than us. Imagine you have a clone, the same as you in every way, except this clone is guaranteed to only live half as long as you. For most people, the knowledge that they will live longer than their clone probably doesn't make them feel that much better about their own life continuously. The clone may have life objectively worse, but still have the same happiness baseline. But why? Well, we only have so many brain chemicals at a time to make us feel anything. Those of us with minor stressors, like a long bus ride to school or work, might just take them for granted as how things are. We don't see them as a unique problem. We might not really think about them at all. In the same way, People who have minor good things, like a shorter commute with a car, probably won't spend all their time appreciating those things. Their brains may even find more minor stressors, like the pain of car maintenance and parking. Now obviously, when we gain something good, we can feel the difference and be happy about it, for a while. If we lose something, we feel the loss. But as long as the changes are not extremely catastrophic, like getting in an accident and becoming severely disabled, we will eventually lose those feelings of loss or joy and just go back to our baseline. In biology, this could be called physiological homeostasis. For an organism to survive, it is crucial for it to be able to recognize the changes in its environment. Our bodies work to establish a normal state, so we can detect when things shift and act on those changes. Social science research calls this the hedonic treadmill, because no matter how hard and fast you run towards being happy, you will always eventually find yourself in the same place. The treadmill won't take you anywhere new. I like the metaphor of the treadmill for this life state because you also always have to keep moving or you fall off. For example, you can't just stop working for too long if you need a break or you're sick. If you do, bad things will happen that aren't easy to reverse. The idea that we have a mental baseline of happiness or fulfillment is also conceptually supported by neuroscience. In my Skinner box video, I talked about how research on rats shows that when they eat something tasty, they get a mental reward, a quick spike of dopamine. The good thing comes, but then you're back to normal. Other than severe, immediate shocks to our brains, like drugs or torture, our normal reward and stress systems can only release so many neurochemicals at a time. Stimulus, in the form of good or bad things, make you feel good or bad, and then the brain chemicals move on and you're back to normal. This somewhat explains why we don't feel strictly better than the people who have it worse than us all the time. We all have the same brain chemicals rewarding or stressing us. So that would mean we're all equally having a time, right? So, okay, this would seem to imply that no matter what shitty or good things happen to us, we all feel the same at the end of the day. We all go back to our baselines. But our brains are way too large and fancy for something simple like that. Our brains want to guide us towards future rewards and steer us away from harm. That means you don't necessarily wake up every morning with a clean slate. Sometimes, brain chemical processes stick around. For those rats, if the food came immediately, there was a spike of dopamine. But if there was a delay between the signal that food was coming and the actual food, the anticipation caused the release of a steady drip of dopamine, a dopamine ramp. Just the anticipation of something good coming gave them a continuous reward, instead of the spike's drop-off. This is also how bad things work. A quick punishment is a spike in stress, but an unknown punishment at an unknown time can really build up stress chemicals. Now we know long-term stress affects our brains and can make us more susceptible to health and mental issues. So where does that leave us? Many of us are currently here in the middle, on the treadmill. Small good and small bad things might happen, but our overall happiness doesn't increase or decrease. We just stay at our baseline. But some of us have fallen off into the spiral slide of dread. This is when things are bad enough that you can anticipate more bad things happening, and you begin to feel nonstop dread. Some good things might happen, but they aren't enough to get you back to your baseline. For example, let's say you get laid off. Well, that's bad, but you might still recover if you can find a job. Except, let's say your industry doesn't have a lot of open roles right now, so you take a job for much less than before, but now you need to move farther away because you can't afford your old apartment, but you're putting more stress on your car, and it breaks down, things are just kind of starting to spiral. Maybe you're lucky and you have someone in your life who can help you out, or maybe the people in your life are all struggling in similar ways. This dread changes your brain chemistry, your gene expression. So with that in mind, now's a good time to talk about oppression. What exactly is oppression? You are oppressed when you can't get your biological and psychological needs met, specifically for social reasons. If a volcanic winter causes crops to die and you experience a famine, your biological needs won't be met, but that harm was caused by your environment. However, if your government forces a massive investment in heavy industry at the cost of agriculture and you experience a famine, that is oppression caused by other people. Now, we all as humans have biological needs for food, water, medical care to survive, but our large, fancy brains also have psychological needs. We have complex psychological drives for things like recreation, growing wealth and prosperity, social affirmation, self-expression, family, etc. Our brains crave these things and reward us with neurochemicals like dopamine for achieving them, and trigger stress responses when we fail. Now, oppression isn't one missed meal, one bad grade, one rude comment. It is a repeating pattern that leaves you less healthy or happy than you could be, preventing you from reaching your full potential. Oppression is made more bitter since it isn't this unavoidable outcome. Oppression doesn't have to exist. It's caused by other people. It's not bad luck, it's injustice. So, who feels oppression? It's the question at the center of the recent controversy around DEI. Well, most of us experience oppression. The lucky of us have our biological needs met, but we're still on the treadmill. We spend much of our time and most of our energy on work. Work with often no real job security or tasks that give us meaning. There's no guarantee that working harder and sacrificing will be rewarded. After work, we often don't have enough time and energy to pursue what's truly important to us. We're struggling with finding and maintaining fulfilling relationships. We're putting off having families or retiring. For the unlucky of us, our biological needs aren't met either. Groceries, gas, and rent are a constant struggle, even for people working full-time or multiple jobs. We're not getting our needs met under this current system. This oppression affects our brains, how we experience joy, how we feel stress and dread and hopelessness. But why is this oppression and not bad fortune of our economic reality? If most of us are oppressed, who isn't? Let's put a pin in oppression for now, and let's talk about the good life state. Maybe you were born here, or maybe you've finally exited the treadmill, and you can finally take a break, rest. And when you're good and rested, you can go wherever you want. You can move forward and upward. You have choice, opportunity. Of course, you could still find ways to be miserable. Plenty of fortunate people aren't happy. But at the end of the day, you have control of how you want to spend your life. You can spend time finding yourself or taking big risks because you'll have a large safety net to fall back on. You're not a few missed paychecks or a hospital visit away from financial calamity. You have the space, the time, and the resources to seek out fulfillment. If you do seize the opportunity, things will be so stacked up in your favor, you can reasonably expect life to just keep getting better. Maybe you chose the path where you've just graduated with a great degree in a promising field, and you are already getting multiple offers to your dream jobs, where you hope to be able to use the money to start your own business, where you'll be able to save up generational wealth, be respected by everyone you know, have a loving spouse, great grandchildren playing nearby, as you spend your golden years basking on your fulfilled life, also known as the American dream. The American dream is the idea that by working hard in an ethical way, you can outrun and escape the treadmill. You can live a life of abundance as you choose. And that's what many of us were promised by the older generations. Family members we trusted who saw it themselves firsthand and still truly believe. And that's the thing. There was something truly special about the American dream. In most of the world, for most of time, wealth and power stayed within the monarchy and the nobility. In the age of monarchies, the United States must have seemed a utopian meritocracy. The lines of the ruling class were blurred. If you had enough ambition, you could build a life for yourself. A man was only limited by his wit and his gumption. We hear incredible stories of immigrants with nothing rising from poverty to become famously wealthy and influential. The power of this past is hard for us to really understand today, in a world where most countries have caught up or surpassed us. Now, obviously, it wasn't a true meritocracy. There was still an obvious advantage to starting wealth and connections, your race, your gender, other demographics, and just pure luck. But it was, for a time, as close to a meritocracy as our human societies had probably gotten. And, as imperfect as it was, these brave new possibilities were a big deal to the older generations, and they've passed their awe and worship of these ideals down to us. The problem is, of course, that the American dream is dead. It's unreachable. We've been told that we're entitled to this freedom of choice, growth, Joy and bounty are within our reach for the taking. But we're stuck here on the treadmill. We work for small, incremental improvements to our lives that don't meaningfully change our ability to appreciate our time here. Or worse, we're spiraling into dread and despair. So where's my American dream? Why don't I have an American dream? This is a fundamental question for many of the people you may disagree with. Whose fault is it? Well, it depends on who you ask. Could be lazy millennials and their avocado toast. Some lawful-born and bred citizens blame immigrants. Some legal immigrants who worked really hard for their way in blame illegal immigrants. Some people blame DEI. But I think the answer is actually surprisingly straightforward. How does a country with such a high GDP per capita, money produced per person, have so many people without their basic biological needs met? Now, economics are really complicated. There are so many variables that factor in, and it's hard to answer a question with any one simple answer. But one part of the bigger answer does absolutely come back to economic positive feedback loops. A positive feedback loop is like a wildfire. The larger it grows, the hotter it gets, and the wider and more quickly it spreads. This is not just linear growth, there is an acceleration. What is unique about very large wildfires is that they don't just accelerate their growth. They can start to create their own weather, a runaway effect. They can change the environment itself to be even more favorable to them. Before the flames themselves can even reach in the direction the fire is moving, the heat and wind desiccate the materials, making them even easier to burn. The weather can create winds where oxygen is being pulled into the center of the fire. There's also a positive feedback loop for wealth. The more money you have, the more resources you have, the more you can afford to invest instead of spending. Billionaires, however, are not just benefiting from the positive feedback loops. They don't just sit on their wealth or invest to make more money. They invest to change their environment. The term oligarch is more fitting than billionaire because it's not about the actual dollar amount these people have. It's about the almost inconceivable amount of power they are able to wield with their resources and influence. These resources are used to convince people how to feel, what to think. They make the environment more favorable for being an oligarch. Now we'll get to the value of the truth, but there are also some very powerful lies. One of their heavily promoted lies that has really worked its way into our mindset is that we're all still in this zero-sum game. Every dollar I have is a dollar you don't. But we know scarcity isn't real for some things like calories per person, basic food. We have more than enough calories to feed everyone in the US, but we fail to do so on the large and small scale. Why can't our nation meet everyone's needs despite being an economic powerhouse? What exactly is preventing us from moving towards a post-scarcity society? We've had so many breakthroughs in automation, food production, technological efficiencies. There doesn't seem to be a concrete economic reason all of our biological and most of our psychological needs are not being met. Even people working full-time, even multiple jobs, can be struggling. How are the proceeds of all of our work being diverted from us? Keep these questions in the back of your head as you see the major shift in jobs and AI over the next decade. The only thing keeping us from a post-scarcity society will be oppression. Other people. Their other lie that has been very effective is that billionaires are the triumph of the American dream, and they deserve to be protected. By working hard and in an ethical way, any of us can find happiness and success and fulfillment, and those of us with the most success must have worked the hardest. They were deserving, and they got their reward. This lie tells us that the ludicrously wealthy deserve to be protected for two main reasons. The first reason is because they deserve what they got, so protecting them is just. And by upholding a just system, we will be rewarded. Their wealth will trickle down to us. Unfortunately, one generally becomes a billionaire by ruthlessly exploiting other people, breaking rules. People who get ahead in business don't do it by having principles. They do it by breaking laws and rules at the right time. Lawsuits and regulatory fines are just the cost of doing business. We can't expect the kinds of people who are making billions to also be the kinds of people who would give back to their nation. The second and most insidious reason the ludicrously wealthy deserve to be protected is that I want to protect the wealthy of tomorrow because it's going to be me. I'm striving to be worthy. I've worked so hard. I've made so many sacrifices. It all has to be worth something. There has to be some meaning in all of the work I've put in since grade school. Sure, I don't actually believe some CEO will walk into my work tomorrow and hand me $1 billion. It's more about the faith itself. Believing I'm doing the right thing with how I've been spending my life gives me hope. It really comes down to hope, because without hope, where am I? At this point, though, it is blind faith. The American dream is dead. The odds of me becoming the next billionaire are back to the monarchy era of being astronomically unlikely. If you're not already ludicrously wealthy, you've probably missed the boat. So stop protecting today's billionaires and start protecting your current self. In the end, it all seems to come back to patriotism. These oligarchs work hard to convince us that it would be an unjust mockery of American ideals to share the wealth. That's socialism. But it's also a violation of what made this country so special. Anyone with enough ambition and drive could build a life for themselves, prosperity for their future. Except oligarchs have skyrocketed past that state of prosperity. Corporations and boards and shareholders aren't even people so much as they are economic forces. This is just a case of the ludicrously wealthy propping up the dead corpse of the American dream to guilt us into letting them hoard even more wealth. Time to pull out our oppression pin. Oppression is about not having our needs fulfilled. We currently have two major societal forces that deprive people of their needs. The first force I'll call wealth hoarding, economic oppression. We are not seeing the fruits of our economic labor. Some of us live on the treadmill, working hard for small incremental improvements. Others of us are stuck in a spiral slide of dread, unable to come up for air. We have oligarchs so wealthy they can use the wealth to ensure nothing ever challenges that wealth. Infernos creating their own weather to shape the world to their whims. This is oppression, and most of us are living with it. But there's not just one, but two forces of oppression. The other force of oppression is historical social stratification, demographic-based oppression. In the olden days, in addition to the hierarchies of the ruling class, we also used to have these extra hierarchies based on race, gender, weight, disability, age. At some point, we decided that these hierarchies definitely existed because of some intrinsically justified reason. Maybe the justification is moral. Women are pretty devilish. Maybe eugenics. Not everyone can have the best brain. We can now recognize that these kinds of justifications aren't true, but even if they were, isn't it still aligned with the American dream that ambition and hard work is what defines success, not genetic aptitude? We don't fault people for wearing glasses to accommodate their visual disability, despite the fact that their weak, sad, pathetic eyes are clearly genetically inferior. We also don't live in a hunter-gatherer society where we have to throw great-grandpa off the cliff to survive the winter, since he really isn't contributing, except telling the same story for the 500th time. We should really be moving towards the post-scarcity society we have the technology to make happen. In any case, the unlucky bottom of the historical demographics still feel the lingering effects in the form of racism, sexism, ableism, all the biases, and this creates a whole nother framework for oppression. Those who experience demographic oppression are even more susceptible to economic oppression. When you're taking hits from both sides, it becomes even easier to exist in a space where you begin to only expect bad things and dread. Constant and systemic minor stressors can actually shrink your runway or push your baseline happiness down. The way these forces of oppression interact, and the way we're manipulated, manifests as the curse of oppressed privilege. If some average person A is under the economic force of oppression, he is probably in a pretty bleak world with no clearly reachable goals for the future. The way he experiences the world, given his brain's capacity for rewards and stress responses, may actually be fairly similar to person B, who is taking some demographic hits as well. The shapes of their treadmills are different. Person A is only dealing with economic forces and may have more of a runway. He can maybe take more hits, like his car breaking down or being laid off. But they are both on the treadmill. They both feel bleak. Their moment-to-moment experience of life is similar. They have the same reward and stress circuits acting in both their brains. In the same way, let's say person A has economic oppression push him off the treadmill and into the spiral slide of dread. Person C has taken hits from both forces of oppression and is also in a dread spiral. The shapes of their life states are different, but right now they are both drowning, feeling dread all the time. Nothing seems to be getting better. Their suffering is real. And this is where the curse of oppressed privilege strikes. When someone is lucky enough to be higher in the demographic strata, but still oppressed by the economic system, he still may be suffering. If he is told he is privileged, he instinctively feels this to be a cruel and unempathetic kick down at someone already unhappy or struggling. He doesn't have the default capacity to experience the benefit of his own advantages any more than the rest of us do. He only experiences the injustice of his struggles, and that injustice is real and valid. It's not that he is privileged. I think that term should be reserved for the folks off in the American dream state. It's that he is not doubly disadvantaged. So yes, people under both demographic and economic oppression are likely to have much worse and more fragile life states than those under only economic oppression, but he doesn't necessarily have the learned empathetic capacity to understand the experience of being in both systems of oppression. In turn, he hasn't been treated with the empathy and desire to understand his suffering and experience. And this manifests as a curse for everyone experiencing oppression. The economic oppressive forces are being used to exacerbate the demographic oppression. The people behind economic oppression, by definition, have a lot of resources to spend to convince people to look the other way. What? No systemic economic issues here. It's definitely the people on the other end of the demographic strata than you. I suspect that if we were all able to have our needs met, our demographic divides would heal a lot easier. But that's kind of the point. They need our demographic infighting to prevent us from focusing on the real dragon. There's a reason why DEI is being so focused on. It's important because it's the clear intersection of the main symbols of the two oppressive systems. Economic, the workplace. Demographic, the diverse. Diversity in the workplace. The people angry with DEI have some valid questions based on what they have been told. If I'm so privileged, where's my American dream? Why aren't supposedly privileged people thriving under capitalism? Why does our great nation need to be made great again? DEI is the perfect scapegoat to explain why singly disadvantaged people are not living their American dream. DEI explains away difficult economic realities without pointing the finger at the hoarding of wealth. And when America isn't great again, in a few years, maybe it's all the harm that the diverse folks did that will take a really long time to recover from. You can't just make masculine energy overnight. The excuses will keep coming, and the oppressed will keep believing in the systems and supporting the leaders who are oppressing them. We have failed because we have let oligarchs distract us from the economic oppressions we all share, the bleak lack of a future. Their distraction is ingenious, really. It divides us into the entitled and the marginalized. The entitled have been told from a young age that with a bit of hard work, they are entitled to a good life. The marginalized are told that they are undeserving of a good life, and are reasonably angry at this injustice and try to fix it. When the entitled are not given their birthright due to economic oppression, the most obvious target are the marginalized people, already angry and trying to correct the demographic oppression. Everyone has their own perceived righteous anger, fueled by injustice. Our mistake was not being able to see past the inherent shittiness of entitlement to acknowledge the real human experience beneath. As shitty as it is, entitlement is a very natural, instinctual human reaction. We're all capable of it. Unless I am living a bare, minimalist life and donating everything I have earned or inherited, I am being entitled. And that's not fair. There are people who don't have the ability to earn what I do and are not getting their biological needs met. My entitlement to what I have unfairly earned is an injustice to people worse off than me. Now, I'm not arguing that justice is everyone having everything exactly the same. I care about meeting people's biological and psychological needs, and we're actually quite lucky that we seem to be living in a society where we could conceivably have the GDP to do that. I'm saying we can't just shrug and say, well, those entitled people, 50% of the country, are clearly morally bankrupt, so the only solution is to cut all ties. We've been distracted by the outcome of oppression. Normal people having normal reactions to not getting what was promised to them. We've been directing our energy and anger towards people who have been deceived, not the deceivers. And we're seeing the consequences. Remember that game you played with your friends, or imagined playing with your imaginary friends? What is the value of the truth? If we want to convince someone of something, we have different tools we can use to do so. In the game, if you are playing as the deceiver, you can take advantage of the fact that the trustworthy advisor can only tell the complete truth, and sometimes the truth is inconvenient or confusing without the bigger picture. You, as the deceiver, have the freedom in each of the little squares to go all in on vibes. Lots of fur, a clearly recognizable eye. When all the guesser has to go on are small facets of the big picture, it's easier to deceive them. Real life is the same. The average person doesn't have the time or context for broad and accurately nuanced arguments. So they go off arguments with feels and vibes, and those are easy to fake. So what tools does the trustworthy advisor have? Well, the main tool is the real drawing, the truth. Your squares will be coherent in the big picture. They will make sense. The lines between your squares will line up. You can talk about the bigger picture, proportions, how the image is coming together. The value of the truth isn't in the smaller individual arguments, it's in the big picture. But you're still confined by the conviction of speaking the truth. The guesser in the game has the goal to figure out who has the truth. But do real, average people even want the truth? This is a question I've been really struggling with lately. Is my ethical toolkit always a smaller set of someone else who is also willing to be unethical? Will I always be one step behind? I think that while we are missing out on a lot of tools for change, I do think that we have three that unethical people can't really use. The first unique tool that we have is the truth. When the player in the game becomes frustrated by the chaos of the drawing and wants to find some order or meaning, they can try to see which lines are coherent, which connect, which are fake. Our current populism isn't actually good for the populace, even the majority who support it. There are multiple reasons why so many executive orders were signed in such quick succession, but a big one was because many of them aren't enforceable. Trump made populist campaign promises he couldn't keep, so by making executive orders, he gets the positive PR of fulfilling those promises while not actually keeping them. These popularists have no convictions. They are purely self-serving. And this is actually very good, because effective fascism relies on conviction. People willing to do extreme things for their beliefs. People with convictions that are harmful for society are very dangerous because they are organizing, working towards a goal. There may be these kinds of people behind the scenes, but Trump and Elon are self-serving narcissists who see even their own supporters as marks for a con. They are already rich and powerful, and don't necessarily want to change the status quo so much as they want to preserve the current one. Not everyone who wants a better economic future has fallen for specifically the cult of personality of the current popularists. Some people didn't vote for Trump. They voted to escape economic oppression, and he promised it to them. But he can't deliver. He can only distract them by propping up enemies like DEI and trans people. The truth of why we're all unhappy is a truth they don't have. They can try to change the narrative, buy out the news, destroy Wikipedia, but you can't change facts. Now, there are some people who are content to float in a void of personality and conspiracy theories and vibes with no interest in the truth, but that's not the majority of people. Because, at the end of the day, if you don't have some kind of solid grounding, how do you know how to make your life any better? Most people want to be able to make sense of the world around them. But the truth only has a voice if they are willing to listen. This brings us to our next tool, the capability for genuine empathy. Unlike self-serving narcissists, we have the ability to understand the internal needs and struggles of even shitty people. We have an ability to cross the demographic divides in a way they can't. We can keep conversations going. We can acknowledge the suffering of the people who hate us. Now, it's obviously not easy, but it's an ability that we have, and it will become more and more important with time. Countries with homogenous demographics tend to blame other countries for hard times, which makes propaganda very dangerous and effective. We're lucky in the US that with our broad demographics, we are blaming each other. We're lucky because we have easy access to each other. We can remind each other of our shared humanity. We don't want to take up arms against our neighbors. Modern Civil War conflicts don't involve everyone fighting each other. Generally, a small subset of the population becomes sufficiently radicalized to do the actual really psychologically difficult task of taking up arms to brutalize their neighbors. Most people are just caught in the crossfire, and regardless of which side they prefer, they don't see the violence as justified. This is good and bad. Good, kind of, because most people don't want violence and just want to maintain the status quo. Bad, because you really only need to sufficiently radicalize a small portion of the population in order to take power. I think people are being radicalized because they are oppressed but are not allowed to be seen as victims. It is the young white men feeling the economic oppression who have been conditioned their entire youths for the entitlement of coming into their power. Now they're coming of age to find themselves with no future. The tool that we have for empathy should allow us to embrace their struggles as our own and make some connection at some level, so when they go to fight their enemies, they see their neighbors. Now, to be clear, not everyone needs to wield this empathy tool towards everyone else. If you are someone who is really struggling, you should protect your own health and well-being. Diversity oppression is a different kind of monster. It eats you alive in tiny, countless ways. It's entirely valid not to open yourself up to a beating from other angry, hurt people. Likewise, not everyone can benefit from people trying to connect with genuine empathy. For some people, their beliefs are a strong psychological coping mechanism, and to change their mind would be to undermine the entire foundation of their lives and strip them of meaning. There's a great podcast called Alternate Realities, where a son spent a year trying to save his father from conspiracy theories. And he failed. His father lost everyone dear to him, his wife, his daughter, his son, because he couldn't give up his coping mechanism and had to be right. What's important, though, is that there are so many people out there who aren't willing to lose everything just to be right. There are people who can change their minds. People who changed their minds in the last election. Counting off people you disagree with as unreachable before learning more about what they are feeling and where they are coming from is a mistake. If you are able, build and maintain connections with people you disagree with. Be someone who people are willing to listen to, if only because they like you, because you've shown yourself to be a good neighbor. And most importantly, be willing to change your mind and shift your perspective as well. The last tool, and the one categorically farthest from self-serving narcissists, is genuine humility. Being willing to acknowledge when we're wrong. There's been a lot of strife, even among people working towards the same goal. Canceling, for example, is a tool that can be used to bring people's attention to extreme problematic behavior, saving future victims from that behavior. Canceling is also a tool to express allegiance to an in-group by virtue signaling and ostracizing well-meaning people. But the problem is, no one is perfectly ethical. Being a good person is all something we have to strive towards. No one can be perfectly ethical in the constraints of our current systems. For example, you can decide to go vegan to avoid cruelty to animals, and you end up adding more sugar to baked goods to improve the taste, and oh no, you've increased the consumption of sugarcane, which has serious health effects to farm workers. The best we can do for now, living within these systems, is to find a balanced path and keep updating our beliefs with new information. Just don't be shitty to other people. Far too much of the conflict we're mired in comes from other demographically oppressed people, and it's because we have the power to hurt each other. It feels cathartic to take out our anger on someone who is vulnerable in the ways that truly awful people in this world just aren't. You can advocate for yourself without tearing others down. There are many ideologies that can be lived ethically. Christianity has ethical and really shitty people. When you connect with people you disagree with, be honest with the shortcomings of the way you've decided to live your life, but also be open with what you're proud of. For example, I really like drinking milk. Cheese is a part of almost every recipe in my personal recipe book. Dairy brings me a lot of joy, and cows are suffering in the dairy industry. I acknowledge this as one of the many ways I am not being perfectly ethical. I'm also working on consuming less milk, and I'm also trying to figure out the best way to offset this harm. And I might not find a way that I find compelling, so I'll have to reassess at some point. But that's okay, because life is about working out how to exist within a complicated world. Humility does not mean weakness. Your convictions can be strong. Humility is more like being strong and flexible, able to expand and evolve based on new situations, while still able to support your convictions. So you've got your 3 tools: the truth, empathy, and humility. If you skipped the rest of the video to get here, that probably sounds pretty trite, and maybe it does anyway. But whatever we've been doing hasn't been enough, so maybe going forward with them in mind is worth a try. So what can we do with these tools? Now, of course, there are a lot of ethical tools for change that anyone can use that are also really important. Protest, organize, or if you're too tired and overwhelmed, donate to others who are also fighting back. Just see if you can find ways to combine your tools. For example, if you attend a protest, focus your narrative not on the people who were deceived, but the deceivers. Find ways to stretch and flex your empathy and humility muscles. When I'm tired of in real life people and want an easier exercise, I go on Reddit. When I see someone with an interesting take, I like to read their comments and post history. Sometimes it's a dead end, or maybe a bot, but other times, browsing their activity in local, hobby-specific, and even health question subreddits helps to recontextualize their original take. It's an exercise in making them feel more human, in a way you couldn't on a site where people project a single curated identity, like, say, Twitter. I made a video on how to harness your energy around activism and avoid burnout, and for me, it really comes down to finding a small in-person community. Have a reoccurring book club-styled meetup for discussing plans, what you've learned, venting, all with people who want to make the world a better place alongside you. This gives you accountability when you lose momentum, encouragement, and most importantly, connection. If you want somewhere to start using the tools, and you don't already have ideas, something I've been really interested in lately is reclaiming patriotism. While yes, we have a dark past and present, there are aspects of our nation that are worth celebrating. We got rid of monarchies. We have so many cultures and experiences. I've heard this from multiple of my immigrant friends, but the US is really a unique place to land as an immigrant because, unlike in some countries where you will always be considered othered, no matter how long you live there or how much you try to join the community, in the US, there are people who will accept you as American. The US has been a birthplace for so many incredible people. There is so much culture and science. The US is beautiful. It's huge. My Taiwanese friend's definition of a road trip is like 2 hours. Like, that wasn't even my commute to work for a while. Patriotism is celebrating what is genuinely good about our nation. It's honoring the sacrifices people have made. It is making sure that the bounty can be shared and experienced by everyone. Patriotism is when love of your own people comes first. Nationalism, when hate for people other than your own comes first. What are the truths about our nation? What is worthy of celebrating? How can we connect over these truths? How can we acknowledge our failures to live up to the best we can be? Patriotism could be what unites us all against both forces of oppression. The last few weeks, I keep coming back to this Martin Luther King Jr. quote. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. However you see fit to leverage these tools, just remember that most people aren't bad, they're just oppressed. Acknowledging and legitimizing their experience doesn't take away from your own, it just brings you closer together. If this video has helped you better empathize or understand someone in your life, reach out and tell them. You have a lot more in common with a person that you disagree with than someone who doesn't believe in anything. Thanks for watching. Bonus DLC. So I actually made a prototype of my hidden cat game and played it with my friends. It's actually surprisingly fun, and it started a lot of really interesting conversations. So I've uploaded a PDF of the prototype with all the files I used and the full rule set to my Patreon, if you'd like to give it a try. Bonus apology. Now Henry, you might say, what's all this? I just want to enjoy your fun, whimsical, nerdcore, sciencey channel. Same. In times like these, we need spaces for activism, but we also need spaces to recharge. I personally don't have the energy or stamina to make activism content. I would burn out pretty fast. Consider this my one-off civic duty video, and back to more fun, whimsical, nerdcore stuff next week. In the meantime, here's a photo of the sexiest bird I have ever seen in my life. Good God, look at those legs.